the students have questions, but at the same time, are there any specific topics that you feel like, given your background, you could shed some unique insights on that other professors or other folks may not be able to?
Just a couple of things come to mind. I had an experience many years ago. Was one of my first teaching jobs was in Brazil, and I was teaching at the Federal University of Minas Gerais. And it was a time when Brazil had a military dictatorship. And I recall one of the students coming up to me after the class and saying, you should be very careful about what you say, because there are two people in the classroom who we believe are spies for the armed forces. They work for the Air Force. And if you say anything that is against the military government of Brazil, you could be in trouble. So that was a direct experience, kind of relates to some of the stuff in 1984. I've traveled to Cuba several times. And it's interesting. I mean, there are aspects of it that are very positive, and there are aspects that are negative. You know, Cuba's a great country in terms of its music and culture, great beaches. But there you have to be kind of careful about what you say. You know, they did some great things in Cuba, because right after the revolution, which occurred back in 1958, they initiated a really great educational system and free healthcare. Their healthcare is in some respects more accessible than our healthcare is here. But you have to be careful about what you say. I had some questions for you. One of the things that occurred to me is, why do you think that the book 1984 has been so influential? It was regarded as one of the best books of the 20th century. Anyone have any ideas on that?
I think it, especially for rising tension right now, like it's becoming more and more realistic, but it's especially like the telescreen, where people are worried about being surveilled. They're worried about their personal information being leaked in other countries. Finding that, especially I think the Edward Snowden case, and the government is also worried about that. They're worried about their information getting out. I think especially after Watergate, a lot of people were beginning to worry about security breaches, and we've spent so much money with our in different intelligence branches in the past few decades, especially after 9/11, that it's become a priority for Americans to feel like not only their physical being secure, but that their online presence is as well. And 1984 started to talk about that, like emotional manipulation through a digital world.
I have to agree with everything you said there. I'm curious, how did people see the role of the internet? I mean, that was something that Orwell did not anticipate. How do we feel like our lives are controlled today in contrast with what he foresaw? Because he was writing this book 80 years ago. He couldn't anticipate all the things that happened. One of the things that struck me was, how much he got right and how much he missed. Kind of curious as to what your ideas are on that.
So is your question more like how the internet impacts a lot of these predictions?
Exactly.
Anyone have any thoughts?
And I was wondering, in your experience within like international relations, especially working in education abroad, if there was like a wide discrepancy between the relationship between a country's government in relation to their education systems and the kinds of individuals who excel in power structures, like more conformist individuals or people who would speak out?
That's an excellent question. And in fact, my experience is that there is a relationship between the kind of government and the kind of education that occurs in different countries. For example, I studied in England, and there was a very strong influence on education, a lot of government funding for it and encouragement. Contrast that with work that I did in Nicaragua, for example, and there the very basic education. On one hand, there wasn't the resources available, but there wasn't the resources devoted. Cuba, a country which was very poor, put a lot of money into education, and as a consequence, they were able to develop a biotechnology industry. They've been able to develop medicines and provide assistance, sending doctors all around the world, because education is a very important part of the policy of the government. What do you think about here in the United States? Do you think that we're spending enough money on education?